Dr. Joanne Lasowski, journalist and journalism educator, and we're here to discuss issues of importance to the Caucasus. With us today is Ambassador Richard Kauzlarich. Ambassador Kauzlarich is the former ambassador to Azerbaijan and a distinguished visiting professor at the SCAR School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Welcome again, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So let's start with the recent contacts between Azerbaijan and Armenian leaders, which have become unusually active. They both took part in the UN General Assembly, the Council of Europe, and now the European Political Community Summit. How significant are all these meetings? Given your earlier criticism of the limited progress after August 8 Washington summit, do you see these contacts as a genuine step toward the peace process?
Well, first of all, it's good that they're meeting with each other. I mean, it would be easy enough to find an excuse, big meetings, lots of people to talk to, but, they seem to look for opportunities to engage directly, and that's a good thing. The best part about it, it doesn't appear to be planned. So there's kind of a spontaneous element that I think all of us should be happy about. What interested me, and I've got a list here of all the things that have been going on that really don't necessarily involve the two leaders, as important as that is. You have the Armenian, I think he was Deputy Minister of Security or the Interior, going to Baku for an international meeting, and there was no drama associated with the visit as one would normally expect. You have these contacts obviously at the summit level. You've had the trip discussions. U.S. customs officials have gone to Armenia to talk about, in a sense, the process that has to be in place for that transportation link to go forward. I've seen media discussion about the possibility of Turkish Airlines flying to Armenia, these are all, to me, the most important part is kind of what goes on behind the curtains when you've got all the focus on the two leaders. There just seems to be much more activity, and that to me is what gives me a little more optimism than the last time we spoke, because things are happening. What I am a little concerned about is that everyone seems to be putting off the finalization of the peace agreement until after the elections in Armenia next year, early next year, and I think that's risky. Because things can roll off the rails. There can be, incidents along the border that would cause all the good feeling that we've seen maybe to go away. We've already seen efforts by certain members of the Armenian American community to try to create problems for Azerbaijan in the U.S. Congress. That is not helpful for me, from my point of view. Where I still am a little cautious, it's really on the peace agreement itself, and I think it really needs to be, the action in place has to be taken now, so that when the elections in Armenia take place, moving to the peace agreement.
So both Azerbaijani and Armenian leaders have been showered with congratulations on moving forward toward peace. At the EPC summit in Copenhagen, French President Macron said he was extremely happy with the agreement signed in Washington and emphasized that France fully backs this process. In your view, is Europe now completely behind the Washington peace process? Can we say Europe is fully on board at this point?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I don't think Macron necessarily speaks for all of the EU, but it is important for him to have that. And you talk about interesting meetings. There was an encounter between him and President Aliyev. It appeared from the video anyway that they were smiling, which is a good sign. But I think, you know, France's position as a former member of the former Minsk group, they've been very active in the peace process now with the U.S. And with Russia. And they, you know, having them be publicly engaged on the next steps is really very, very important. France can play a leadership role in developing an EU position. I would hope the EU is prepared to step forward on the economic side, because the post-peace agreement relationships are going to depend on economic relations, not just between Armenia and Azerbaijan through this trip corridor onto Europe. And so Europe has a very, very significant role to play. Armenia has made no secret of its desire to be ultimately a member of the EU. Azerbaijan has not gone that far, but still the prospect of closer relations with the EU, I think, will only encourage the two capitals, Baku and Yerevan, to, you know, stay the course, keep moving towards peace, and recognize that both the U.S. and Europe, whether their positions are identical or not, I'm not worried about. The fact that they're both engaged, each can do different things and should do different things to support the peace process. That's the key.
So Prime Minister Pashinyan, speaking at the Council of Europe, said that pushing for the return of Karabakh Armenians too soon is actually undermining the peace process. At the same time, we hear other voices, as you mentioned earlier, the Russian foreign minister officials, and then some members of U.S. Congress, the Armenian diaspora. What do you make of these statements?
Well, look, the future of those Armenians who lived in Karabakh legitimately, let me put it that way, people who have long family links and personal connections to Karabakh, and were forced to leave. I'm not going to get into an argument about, you know, whether they left voluntarily or left because they feared the Azerbaijani return to Karabakh. They have certain rights, and those rights need to be respected. If they choose to return at some point, that should be an option for them. You know, it reminds me a lot of what I saw in Bosnia, when people from different ethnic groups were expelled from regions and they wanted to return. It was very important for that right to return to be preserved. And so I think that's something that really needs to be maybe not on the front line of the issues that have to be addressed before you get to a peace agreement, but something that has to be addressed in order for there to be normal relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. How that's handled, I'm not going to get into that right now, but it will not go away. But the way it's been presented by some of the extreme commentators from the Armenian side as almost a necessary condition for Armenians to go back and take if you will, take Karabakh back. That is not helpful. And I think we need to recognize it's a problem and figure out ways to address it, but in a broader context of the peace agreement.
So let's talk a little bit about Russia. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman recently said that neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan has formally dissolved the 2022 declaration that included Russia, and she framed it as still being valid. Does that imply that we now have two declarations in force, the original 2021 and whatever new agreement is before us? How do you reconcile those claims, or do they need to be reconciled?
Well, I don't think we should try to reconcile them because, you know, Russia's intent here is not a good intent. You know, there were, you know, words of support immediately after the summit from Moscow, very general. But it was clear to me the way the summit results unfolded and the emphasis that was placed on the economic relationship, particularly the corridor through Armenia, that Russia and Iran both were going to be very unhappy and do what they could to frustrate the outcome of the Washington summit. I'm not aware of any agreement that Armenia and Russia, or Azerbaijan and Russia, or the three of them together, that says the only peace agreement that is valid is one that's negotiated within a trilateral framework. I don't know where the Russians get that, but you know, it could just be I'm not as informed about some of these details. But I just think the position is not helpful that they articulated, and I think that for Armenia and Azerbaijan, and for the U.S., and now as you raised for Europe, we just proceed ahead. We have an initial agreement. The two parties are committed to that, at least to the extent of the understanding that they had in Washington. Still else to be worked out, but there's no dual treaty out there that, you know, once you initial it in Washington, you have to initial a different agreement in Moscow. The understandings between Moscow and Azerbaijan and Armenia are not of that nature.
So we're seeing sort of a sunset happening with the relationships. Azerbaijan and Armenia are now sort of turning more toward the West, especially as the relations with Russia weakens and as Moscow becomes more distracted by Ukraine. In your view, are these two countries beginning to look more seriously at what Europe and maybe the US can offer them?
Well, the key word there is seriously.
Okay.
I think they are both looking. I think in a sense, Armenia is more serious because they've made this at least rhetorical commitment to the EU and to a European future. Azerbaijan has, over the years, kept its options open. I think there's a certain idea on the part of Baku that you know, now's the time to have a better relationship with the United States under President Trump, and therefore, you know, taking a more pro-U.S. position is a good thing. Don't forget, there still are a number of outstanding issues between Russia and Azerbaijan which are not connected with the peace process. The Azov shoot-down, the attacks on Azerbaijanis living in Russia. These things are independent of the Washington summit or the agreement, and those are negatives. I noted in the media today that senior Russian officials are going to be coming to Baku, and whether those officials will try to repair the damage in the bilateral relationship. It will be an interesting signal, I think, as to whether you know, President Aliyev is going to maintain this more pro-Western path that he's indicated. There's still a great deal of interest in having Western investment, both energy and non-energy, in Azerbaijan, so that's a plus. And I think even though the attention is focused on Armenia, the the activity that the United States government has undertaken with the trip corridor should be reassuring to Azerbaijan that there's going to be activity from the United States to support that connection that Azerbaijan so much desires, and I would say needs, between Nakhchivan and the mainland.
So let's turn a little bit toward Turkey now. President Erdogan and President Trump finally held a meeting after years of strained relationships between the U.S. and Turkey. From your perspective, what does this signal for the regional dynamics, particularly for Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Yeah, that's the point that I haven't seen covered in terms of the meeting between Erdogan and Trump. A lot of attention to security arrangements, discussion about Turkish purchases of U.S. LNG. I'm not sure Azerbaijan will be totally happy about that, but still Turkey has indicated, in a sense, its desire to have a closer relationship with Washington. But I haven't seen anything, and maybe it's just that I'm behind in my reading that would indicate that either the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan or the economic links were part of that discussion. But there's a lot of other things going on in the world that are going to determine the U.S.-Turkish relationship, including the Gaza agreement, which Turkey must play a positive role in pushing Hamas toward accepting that agreement. And so the U.S. has a number of issues on the table with Turkey that Trump is going to want to address. And I would hope at some point down the road, maybe, that's a good expression to use, that there'd be discussion about what Turkey's role should be in terms of the transportation corridor, and encouraging Turkey to take steps, in addition to the ones that are already in play, to increase contacts with Armenia and normalize that relation. So there's a lot that could be going on in a very positive sense. I've seen no negative either vibrations or words that would indicate that Turkey is not supportive of the agreement as initial, and in a very positive way, they've been engaged with Armenia to take some very initial steps to more normal relations.
Which is always going to be a good sign if we see that relationship grow again. So finally, the U.S. has been pushing hard on sanctions against Russian oil and gas. What do these measures mean for smaller energy players like Azerbaijan? And on a related issue, the recent arrest of a high-profile former SOCAR executive, Adnan Ahmadzada. How do you interpret that development? Do you think this could be the beginning of a broader process? And if so, what might that investigation look like?
Well, I think that's an interesting illustration of what the United States is trying to accomplish with the sanctions that affect other countries than India and, the ones that have been in the media headlights for the last few months. Azerbaijan has a problem. And the case that you mentioned is an illustration. There are people either connected with SOCAR, or in this case, formerly connected with SOCAR, who have been engaged in transactions that have facilitated Russian oil getting to international markets, whether it's through ghost fleet tankers or blending this with blending Russian oil with Azeri oil, and that ending up in the news. It just, and I suspect, sadly, it's only the tip of the iceberg, that there have been a lot of transactions going on that have not been public, where either Azerbaijani officials or energy sector officials have been involved in facilitating transactions in Russian oil. There's money to be made in that. And you know, Azerbaijan has a long-standing relationship with Russia in the energy sector. It has in the past, you know, imported Russian oil. It has imported Russian gas to help, in a sense, allow Azerbaijan to export its own gas and use the Russian gas, which is less marketable for a variety of reasons, for re-injecting into oil production, among other things, in Azerbaijan. But the sanctions are serious. We're you know, a lot can be said in a negative sense about how Trump has approached Russia generally and in terms of the Ukraine war. But on sanctions, it's been a pretty aggressive approach. And the EU, despite differences, you know, within the community, is continuing its sanctions as well against officials and entities from Russia. So this is going to be intensified. It's also going to affect Iran because we've seen in just the last few weeks additional sanctions snapback applied in the UN framework, and then again the EU taking a very solid position on sanctions against Iran. So it's you know, it's a sanctions-rich environment in the Caucasus, and I think, and this is just speculation on myself, on my part. I think part of the reason that we've seen this attention to the process, the Azerbaijani legal process against the SOCAR official, was because the United States put pressure on Azerbaijan to basically stop.
Good point. That's a very good point. Well, we're going to keep our eyes open on these things, and we'll be talking to you again soon, I'm sure, Mr. Ambassador. Thanks for your time and your insights.
Well, good. I hope we can have continued positive discussions about Armenia and Azerbaijan.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you.